Multiple reports saying that Carmelo Anthony will waive his no-trade clause, accepting a deal that will send him to the Oklahoma City Thunder in exchange for center Enes Kanter, forward Doug McDermott, and a 2018 second-round draft pick. The trade creates yet another power out west, with Melo joining reigning MVP Russell Westbrook and Paul George. Plus, it puts an end to a 6.5 seasons of disappointment in New York. We welcome in two gentlemen who cover the Knicks day in and day out, who have spent countless hours following Carmelo, Begley of ESPN, and Stefan, Bondy of the Daily News. Guys, 1 minute, Steve Mills and Scott Perry are saying Carmelo's going to be at Media Day Monday. Next thing we know, he is off to OKC. So was this just a case, even without Phil Jackson, that these two parties could no longer coexist?
Absolutely. I mean, that's where they were, and that's why this thing got done when it did, because the Knicks didn't want Carmelo at Media Day on Monday. Carmelo did not want to be at Media Day Monday. So this was like an artificial trade deadline to get this whole thing out of the way, because they didn't want the drama and the distraction that came with continuing the Carmelo Anthony trade talks into training camp, into the preseason. Carmelo wanted to start fresh, and I think that's why you saw recently the list expand to Oklahoma City, to Cleveland, because he wanted to get something done here. He realized Houston wasn't going to happen. Yeah,
this has been going on for months, right? And when the new regime took over, they wanted to start fresh. They wanted to start this youth movement. And they made it known from the beginning they don't want Carmelo part of it. When they put out the blogs, and they didn't mention his name, they put out a season ticket promotion. Carmelo's face wasn't even part of it. So they wanted to move on. Carmelo was a potential distraction. And they decided, hey, we're going to have to take this deal because a better one might not come up.
Now, this has certainly been an era of just up and down, lots of turmoil. But what legacy does Carmelo leave behind as a Knick?
It's complicated to me, because on one hand, they won 54 games in 2012, 2013. They got to the second round of the playoffs further than a Knicks team had done in so long. But really, the promise of conference championships and getting to the finals, he never got there. But how much of that is his fault? Because you look at the numbers, I think like 70-plus players have come through the locker room since Carmelo's been here. 4 coaches, several executives. It's been just a turnstile, and there's been no continuity. So I think some of it is not Carmelo's fault. That he does get the blame for things like defense and holding the ball too often, but a lot of things around him out of his control, I think, didn't go well through no fault of his own.
I agree with you, but to me there were two Carmelo Anthonys, and I'm not talking about the hoodie Melo that's been circulating. There was the Carmelo Anthony of his first contract, and then there was the Carmelo Anthony of his second contract. In his first contract, he led the Knicks to 3 consecutive playoff appearances. He was an all-NBA player. He was the player that he was being hyped up to be. Then he signs a second contract, and it was just all downhill. Now, that's not all his fault. I mean, there were some extenuating circumstances that weren't his fault. Phil Jackson took over. All of a sudden, the triangle was part of it. He did not fit well into that. He also had knee surgery. But if you look, after he signed that $124 million contract, the Knicks were a big disappointment.
Right. Now, you just mentioned the triangle. I think a lot of fans are happy to know the triangle seems to be done. Jeff Hornacek said the offense will be different. They're going to open it up. How do you guys see Enes Kanter and Doug McDermott fitting into this revamped offense?
The interesting thing with Kanter, to me, is you look at the Knicks and they have bigs in place. Obviously, they have Kristaps Porzingis at the 4. They have Billy Hernangomez. They have Kyle O'Quinn. They have Joakim Noah. So they have a plethora of bigs here. To me, I'm just wondering if there's another move, because they have so many centers. Do they look at Enes Kanter as a guy who maybe they can look to deal as the trade deadline approaches, or do they see him as a long-term piece here? If I had to guess today, I would guess it was the former and not the latter.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to deal Enes Kanter. That deal makes no sense to me. Enes Kanter coming to this team. I mean, he's basically the same kind of player as Willy Hernangomez, except you hope Willy Hernangomez develops into a better player than that. So, you know, they trade Carmelo, who had his defensive deficiencies, and they somehow get 2 players back who are worse defensively. I mean, I don't like the deal for the Knicks. I thought maybe if they waited long, they could have gotten something better. Maybe wait for a first-round pick, a late first-round pick, but I guess they felt like they had to do something.
Well, guys, Melo watch is over. Begley and Stefan, Bondy, thank you so much for your insight.